Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to show you my round 3 game from the Pula Open. I faced a lower rated opponent after losing round 2 to IM Nenad Doric, and I saw that my opponent in this game plays the same thing all the time. He plays the modern defense. And if you've by any chance seen my last game against the modern, I was facing Damian Horvat and it was a draw, but I didn't play the opening well. So after the tournament in Versar, I sat down and learned a lot of lines. So after d4, g6, I played c4, the same line I played against Damian Horvat, bishop g7, knight c3, d6, and e4. And there are many ways for black to play here. Damian played e5. My opponent in this game played the main move, knight c6. And this is now the Kotov variation of the modern, and I spent a long time learning this opening. So I'm going to show you two thematic positions that could come out of this opening. So after bishop e3, black almost always plays e5, white plays d5, and knight d4 is playable. However, it's really not that good. On knight g2 you have to take, and you've traded your piece that usually sits on c5 and creates a lot of pressure on the queen side. I don't think it's a good idea for black to trade the b8 knight for the g1 knight, because in King's Indian structures the g1 knight is usually the piece that doesn't do anything unless you play knight f3, and I usually don't play it with knight f3. So the main move here, instead of knight d4, is knight c7. And there are a couple of ways for white to play. You could play normal moves like queen d2 or bishop d3, but there are two strong continuations, one of them way more complicated, and that's g4. Now, I did not play that. After g4, we reach a position that's extremely complicated for my taste, and at first, I was preparing to play g4 in this game because it was highly likely we were going to reach this exact position. I'm going to show you what type of position you can expect. f5, gf5, gf5, queen h5 check. And now black has a choice between king f8 and knight g6. I think king f8 is much stronger. The engine says king f8 is slightly worse, but I'm not going to go into too much detail. But after king f8, there are so many complications that after, let's say, queen f3 here and f4, that it's very hard to navigate this. And their king isn't misplaced at all. It's actually very safe. So I had given up on the idea of playing g4, and I switched to a new plan, c5. And this is the best move according to the engine. I'd been preparing c5 for hours that day before the game, because there are many continuations black could play. The main move against c5 is f5, of course, and this doesn't really work. cd6, cd6, bishop b5, and you could go king f8, which is fine, but bishop d7 is what most people play. And now white has traded off the light-squared bishop. And in most positions where white ends up playing f3, which white would do here, we've gotten rid of our worst piece. This knight's going to be on e2, and d6 is going to be a permanent target, c7 is going to be a permanent infiltration square, and all the while black has to sort out this extremely bad bishop. So again, c5, f5 is what I'd been expecting. Of course, dc5 is no good, I just go bishop c5 and white's much better. Knight f6 is another option, but after knight f6, cd, queen d, knight b5, nah. Okay. So I was expecting f5. My opponent played a move I haven't looked at all. Knight h6. Knight h6 has never been played. And I spent probably more than 15 minutes trying to figure out this position. So the obvious problem with queen d2 is that knight g4 works. So, you know, that doesn't work. You cannot go queen d2. Knight g4 is with tempo on the bishop. If you go bishop e2 first, then black has time for f5, and on queen d2, the knight can go back to f7. So there's no immediate way to exploit the knight on h6. you cannot force the knight back to g8. So I'd quickly given up on the idea of bishop e2 and queen d2 and all that stuff. So I switched back to trading these two pawns, weakening d6, and exchanging the light-squared bishop. Now, the engine says bishop b5 straight away is the best move. Okay? And the reason it says that is funny. You take, queen takes, and then you go queen b3. And I would never think of this move, because after black castles, you cannot take on b7, so what's the point? I still don't understand this. Now it says h3, and this is supposed to be +1. What I did is about +0.9, so not a big difference, and it's very understandable to humans. I traded on d6 first, then I played bishop b5 check, and after bishop d7, I traded and simply played f3. And now I have, sorted out my bad piece. I no longer have a bishop on f1. I can play knight b5. I can play queen d3, queen b5, queen d3, of course, before knight b5. And there's going to be pressure on d6. At the same time, it's not easy for black to develop the a8 rook, because a7 hangs. Of course, in the modern, same as in the King's Indian, black needs to play f5, so, my opponent played f5. And here I made a mistake. I should have gone queen d3 straight away. I had been worried that after f4, so let's say I go queen d3, f4, bishop f2, g5, g4. With the knight on h6, g4 seemed incredibly dangerous to me. However, I could actually play h3, and black would need to waste the tempo on knight f7 to play h5 and, continue with g4. So instead of playing queen d3, which is the best move, the idea is, of course, queen b5, exchanging queens with a completely winning position or forcing the queen to c7, I played queen d2. And this is, it's not a big deal. The engine says +0.6 or something, but it's a mistake. It was unnecessary. I ended up playing queen d3 3 moves later anyway. Knight f7, knight g2, f4. Now f4 is very committal and it's very thematic. Of course, black wants to go h5, g5, g4. But there was a really nice plan I was very much afraid of. This knight's useless, so bring the knight to f6 first. It's not like I have a lot to do. You can put your knight on f6 and then continue with f4. I'm never taking on f5. I'm never moving my kingside pawns, and I don't want to castle. So black technically has a lot of time. So I think f4 was a bit premature. Okay, bishop f2, of course, g5, standard. And now I played queen d3, which I should have done in the first place. I shouldn't have played queen d2. Okay, so queen b5 is a very strong threat, and I think a6 is absolutely necessary. Now, the main idea behind queen d3 was to provoke a6. And I wanted to provoke a6 because I wanted to go a4, a5, knight a4, knight b6, winning. And I couldn't see a way for black to defend, unless they go for immediate kingside counterplay. After a6, black's queenside has collapsed. Its a6 is an extremely big weakness, and it means that I have successfully conquered the queenside, and unless black has something on the kingside, I'm eventually going to win. Now, if black does not play a6, let's say they go g4, I can take this. g4 is premature. Queen g4, and I have h3. The g2 pawn is immune due to rook g1, winning the bishop. So an alternative, another one, let's say, is castles, and then queen b5. And if the queen is forced to c7, I can safely castle, and on a6 go queen b3, follow that with king b1. Nothing's going on the king side because my king ran away, and these two pawns aren't really dangerous, in my opinion. This is, according to the engine, a big advantage to white. I would say white's better. I don't think it's a big advantage from a practical standpoint. So my opponent did play a6, and I was really happy because I couldn't see a kingside attack happening with my king still on e1, and I just thought I'm going to win. So I played a4. Of course, there's no way to stop a5. If you play a5, you're giving up the b5 square again. If you play b6, then I play bishop takes b6. So a5 is happening. Black needs to go for counterplay. Okay, a5. And now I think my opponent played it a bit too slow. He played the best engine move, bishop f6, but I think g4 was more precise. At least, you know, psychologically it means that black is saying, I don't care, let's just, you know, play knight a4, knight b6, I'm just going to roll you over on the king's side. The idea behind bishop f6 is clear though, after g4, bishop h4. Also in some cases bishop d8, covering b6. Okay, knight a4, now black needs to defend b6. Black has to play knight c8. That's the only move. If I land the knight on b6, it's going to be over. Not because black necessarily loses the exchange. Technically, black could go rook d8 here, or I don't know, rook b8. But I'm covering the c8 square, and black will never be able to challenge it. All right, so knight c8. And in this position, the engine wants me to play king d2, which I hadn't even considered. I just played b4, and b4 is an extremely important move later on. In this position, it loses most of white's advantage, but the point is, once I play knight b6, and knight b6, a b6, creating the c7 square as an outpost, I'm preventing a5. And I really wanted to play against a5, because if black manages to get in that liberating move, then I'm not going to have as big of a bind on the queen side. My plan was ultimately to put a pawn on b6 and play rook c7. And that position, which I had assessed as winning, is what I was playing for the rest of the game. Okay, my opponent played g4. Good, queen c3. And queen c3 is a mistake. Queen c3 is a mistake, after which black is actually better with bishop d8. Another point behind... I'm sorry, there's something in my room. It's a wasp. I don't know the English word for the hornet. It's a hornet. Okay, I'm not allergic, so I don't really care, but it wouldn't be nice if it stung me. In any case, my opponent should have gone bishop d8 here, and that covers the c7 square. So instead of queen c3, I should have gone knight ec3. Just playing it slowly, and after knight g5, maybe rook g1, but I didn't, I looked at knight ec3, definitely, but after h4 I couldn't see a way forward here. If I take, then, you know, black plays h3, and this seemed very messy. I'm not going to take that, because I'm losing to rook h3. So I didn't really like that, and I saw queen c3 as an opportunity. I'd completely missed bishop d8 in this exact position. I was just focused on bishop h4. Okay, but my opponent played queen e7, which is a mistake. And after queen e7, the idea is bishop h4, of course, but now it's already too late, rook c1, and I'm infiltrating on c7. Bishop h4, queen c7, the engine says equal, but the type of equal black can get is very unclear. So the engine says equal after queen h4, king f1, and castles. That seems crazy. First of all, I can take the pawn on b7, and after rook a7 I can go queen b8. And then, you know, the knight's hanging. So I had looked at this, and I thought, this is amazing for me. Queen h4 doesn't do anything. I'm just going to take on b7. Unfortunately, it was equal, because, you know, 15 moves down the line, there's a tactical justification for losing a bunch of material. My opponent and I, both being low-rated, of course, did not see that. However, in this position, my opponent blundered. Queen h4 was the best move. Queen d7 is just an awful move. Because, of course, my opponent doesn't want me to take on e7. He wants to trade queens under more favorable circumstances. If he passes and I go queen e7, king e7, then I have rook c7 winning the b-pawn. And if knight takes e7, then I have knight b6 winning. So I can understand queen d7, but it's no good, because I'm infiltrating on c7 anyway. So takes, and simply rook c2. And now my plan is very simple. I go rook hc1, rook c7 check, knight b6, a b6, and then I play knight c1, and knight b3, and knight a5, and black resigns, because b7 hangs. So my opponent played rook b8. It doesn't help. It's over at this point. Rook d8, rook c7 check, king e8 only move, knight b6. You have to take this, because, you know, the knight's hanging. I don't know what else to suggest. So takes, and rook d7. I don't really mind trading a pair of rooks, takes, and after king e8 I played knight c1, and that's it. The worst part is that my opponent can never move the knight because I have rook g7, threatening rook g8 and rook g5, and the same goes for knight h8. I still go rook h7 and pick up the pawn. He did play knight g5 here, and I think I could have gone rook g7, but I didn't want to allow rook c8, because on rook g7, rook c8, rook g8 check, king d7, rook g5, rook c1, fg4, I win a couple of pawns, but I'm not up a piece. After my next move, I'm just up a piece. So I played knight b3, preventing rook c8, rook c1, and now my opponent cannot save everything. If he goes knight f7, then I go knight a5, and if he tries to defend with knight e8, I can do whatever I want. I can play rook h7, for example, but I would have gone knight c4, just overwhelming the d-pawn, and after knight f7 defending, bringing my king in first, like let's say bring my king here, sorry, knight a5 and king c4, and then take the pawn on h5. But after knight b3, my opponent played king d8, losing a piece. I played rook g7, the knight's lost. If you save the knight, well, there's no way to save the knight, but if you could save the knight, then I have rook g8, winning the rook. So rook c8, rook takes g5. There is no counterplay with the checks, because b7 is hanging. So the game went rook c2, king f1, rook b2, knight a5, rook b1, king e2, rook b2, king d3, rook takes b4, knight b7, king e7, knight a5, my knight's coming to c6, rook takes b6, rook takes h5, gf3, king f7. And now, after king g6, I should have gone rook b7 straight away, but for some reason I thought that rook a7 was just as good. It is just as good, but I went rook a7. Rook b7 would have been cleaner. I played it on the next move. After king h5, I went rook b7 now. I realized that my opponent doesn't have to move the rook. The idea behind rook a7 was to put my opponent in zugzwang, but the king can move an infinite number of times. I was gonna go rook b7, but then I thought rook a7 is better. It isn't, just rook b7 now, and my opponent needs to trade rooks. So the game finished like this. My opponent kept playing on until this position, and here he resigned. I think this game is an excellent lesson on counterplay in King's Indian structures. I mean, you have given up the queen side as black. Unless you come up with something on the king side, you are going to lose, which is what happened. And there's no need to defend, because you've already lost the battle on the queen side. On the other hand, if you create problems on the king side, then, you know, I may start defending myself. Maybe you distract me from going through with my plan on the queen side. I think this is an instructive game, and I'm happy c5 worked on my first attempt. So this was the round 3 game. So after 3 rounds, I was on 2 out of 3. I'm going to show you the round 4 game tomorrow. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.